All right, I am still working on my comparison video between the Everything Wing Chun butterfly swords and the ones I got from Swan at Murasame swords. I've had some other things on my plate, and when I do have free time, while the weather still isn't cooperating with me, I did want to do a couple of simple cutting comparison tests so you can see how they perform. But on a similar subject, wanted to make just this really quick video to talk about flipping. Some of you asked for Sai content as well, so this crosses over between Sais and also butterfly swords. So I wanted to give you just kind of a quick glimpse of, well, how I flip these things, the techniques I've learned. Again, I'm not a master expert, anything like that, nor do I ever intend to contradict anything that you are learning or practicing. But I also wanted to talk specifically about the philosophy of use of flipping, what my experience with it has been, and is it a good idea? And if so, when is it a good idea to have the weapon in this position? All right, sorry about the camera going in and out with the focus. I blew up my not that very old laptop recently, replaced it with a tower. I'm still getting used to new software, new camera setup, and yeah, apparently on this particular setup, the autofocus is going a little insane. So I turned it off. We'll see if that works. But let's talk flipping. I got my classic Sais that I've had since the 70s down off the wall for the first part of this demonstration. It comes down to thumb position, balance, arm movement, and a little bit of assist from the fingers. But what I've basically found to do is if I want to flip it into the reverse position, I've got to get some movement either kind of towards me or kind of sideways, and then get my thumb on this side of the hook and just let it come over. Now, if I want to bring it back, it's a little bit harder to do. It takes a little bit more momentum to flip it again sideways around this way or forward or somewhere in between, depending on what you're doing, to basically release it with your forefingers, let it rotate back. And if you practice that for a while, you can get pretty good at it. It's actually a lot surer in many ways than some of the techniques I demonstrated for like flipping a knife between my fingers. Yeah, so that is something, but obviously you end up in a different grip. Now, balance, grip shape, talked about that in the butterfly swords videos. I look at the Everything Wing Chun swords, very smooth guards, hooks, very nice big space in between. So flipping these is definitely a pleasure. However, the balance is definitely different from a Sai, so I feel like it's just a little bit more sluggish with these. Their weight balance and maybe even a little bit of the air resistance, probably negligible. Yeah, I don't feel quite as sure in the flip as I do with a pair of Sai. Now, the Murasame as a micro comparison, the guards, while the hook is smaller, the guard, a lot more sharp corners, a lot less comfortable. I did slightly round off the sharpness of it just a little bit. But weight and balance, for me, yeah, that moves a lot quicker and a lot surer. So you'll notice what I'm doing most of the time is if I face you, is I'm kind of going between the two angles of upwards and sideways, and the same thing coming back. So that's just kind of how I do it. And just practicing doing this back and forth over and over again is just how you get good at it. Now, what's it for to have the weapon in this position, and is it a good idea? And if so, when is the best time to do it and the worst time to do it? All right, apologies again for the visuals. This new software appears to be extra sensitive. I'm still getting used to it. I noticed my background was just kind of psychedelicing in and out on you. I think that was oversensitivity in the auto white balance. I turned it off, so hopefully no more distracting visual effects. Bear with me. It's a learning curve. Speaking of learning curve, now I do not want to disrespect the traditional systems. That's where I picked up my fundamentals. But then there's what I've learned is my preference based on my experiences, and a lot of my experiences were refined by doing some well-controlled sparring and fencing with implements like this. And you can, with certain safety parameters in place, work with something like a sai because it's blunt, again with certain safety parameters in place. We can talk about that in other videos. But I basically learned that in that kind of live engagement, what works best for me and what doesn't. And I wanted to specifically talk about flipping in, well, two contexts. The flipping itself, but also why have it in the flip position at all. So the first thing I want to do is refer you to TommyBoy6969's channel. He does a lot of great Wing Chun content and a lot of great Wing Chun butterfly sword content. He falls squarely on the no flip. Flip bad, flip dangerous. Now I've studied different systems that are pro flip and no flip, and I fall kind of in the middle a little bit towards no flip, and you're going to see exactly what that means here in a second. But I also like to flip because, you know, I like my dangerous fidget spinners. It's one of those things. So I practice it, but how do I actually use it? Well, it comes down to, again, why I would do it. Now, Tommy Boy's idea is you would really only do it in one situation, which is also going to talk tactics. And that would be, you might be holding the weapon like this, down at your side or behind yourself, so it's kind of a little bit out of sight. And then deploy it while your opponent is still out of measure, when you have plenty of time and calm to do so. And we'll talk about that in the flipping part of our discussion. However, could you use it in a pinch if somebody was suddenly on top of you and striking at you? Yeah, we're going to talk about that too. Now, I did start with the sai, and the idea, and very similar ideas, of the use of the sai in the reverse position. I'm really glad I learned starting with the sai for reasons that are going to become apparent in just a couple of seconds. The idea, though, is the measurements and everything. The sai in the reverse position is basically like having a steel reinforced forearm. So long enough to extend just far enough past your elbow that it doesn't get in your way and entangle you and you don't jab yourself, but you could use it in different kinds of elbow strikes and thrusts, right? You've got the shaft here that we're going to talk about, which as a parrying surface, I'll show you how that works and potentially doesn't. There is a hook here that you could use to hook or even strike sideways like a hammer or knife edge blow. You can also do that with the sides of the pommel, I discovered. But mostly the pommel is often used for thrusting actions, basically a punch of sorts. It's a little hard to get used to, but you can get a lot of power out of it. Do I feel like it's a massive weapons advantage in this position? Not really, believe it or not. And there's similar weapons like Tunfa that do have similar functions, but there are certain areas that I do feel it excels that makes flipping to this position worth it. Tommy Boy is very wary of any use that this could give you that has any advantage. And one thing he points out is that, yeah, the thing is up close against your forearm and there's still a lot of meat exposed. With the sai, absolutely. But as I pointed out in the demonstration I did with the butterfly sword, I feel like I've got a lot more protection. Because what would be catching an incoming weapon, it's further away from my sensitive flesh. And then we'll talk about the D-guard and hand position. But the concern would be anything impacting here is going to slam this into bones, and especially bones that have, you know, some pretty, in certain ways, exposed nerves like your funny bone and stuff like that. You'd be hurting yourself a lot more than it's worth. But you need to flash back and try to imagine 1970s me when I started training. Same height, 5'7", not same weight. 115 pounds. So yeah, not a lot of protective meat on my body. So I was concerned learning sai and Tunfa that I wouldn't be able to pull off a block like this without basically taking an impact of a hard thing right into a sensitive bone. So I learned early on to position this into the meat part of my forearm, away from the sensitive bony bits. So no discomfort. However, if I was to miss, not a good thing. Quick comparison with the butterfly sword. Since I've been doing this for many years, when I picked up the butterfly sword, I immediately held it the same way, kind of. So I'm not going to do the same. I'm not going to bang steel into my sharp edge here. But yeah, I learned how to position it on the meaty part of my arm, and I have practiced this with pels and bamboo and other stuff. So I know I can take a hit this way. The other thing is, yeah, I've got that D-guard in the way. And it's not just about the D-guard being in the way, but the way I naturally orient this. And this is, again, based on my early training. Let me show you from the front. Butterfly sword, edge on towards you, and whatever I tend to be intercepting. Sai, yeah, a little bit more of certain karate styles present. So yeah, I feel like my fingers are just a little bit more exposed. But the point of this is to demonstrate how this can take a hard hit. Let's talk about philosophy of use. All right, Tommy Boy 6969 second point is there are a lot of forms, and again, I don't want to disrespect any of the traditional systems. It's where I picked up a lot of my fundamentals, where they'll demonstrate flipping, not only in their techniques, but in their forms, when you're right on top of the person, right in the middle of the engagement, obviously within measure, obviously in the midst of parrying, trapping, and stuff like that. Now refer back to my video on knife flipping, where I recommended do not ever flip a knife when you're inside measure. And this is Tommy Boy's point. There's just way too much that can go wrong with that. Not only do you have to do it fast, but you have to do it under adrenaline, which is likely going to make you sloppy, with a lot of interfering factors, including, collision with your opponent. So if anything makes you fumble this thing when you most need not to fumble it, that's disastrous. In the middle of this transition, you don't have a grip on this thing. You can easily drop it. It can easily be knocked out of your hand, or worse, knocked into you. So yeah, do not flip. This is my advice. Do not flip, just like do not flip a knife when you are in measure. Do that when you're out of reach. If you wind up getting ambushed at close range and you have to use this thing at close range, keep it there. What would be the other reason why you keep it there? Well, I talked about how I really wasn't as impressed as I thought I would be with the Sai in this position. Now, I could break bricks and concrete and stuff like that, which was really cool with the punch and with the elbow. That was awesome. But otherwise, when I was actually sparring with somebody, I really didn't feel like I was getting my bang for the buck, except in one area. If I had to deal with somebody who had a longer reach weapon or a heavier weapon that hit hard, so a powerful sword strike or staff weapon or maybe nunchaku or something like that, in the forward position, I didn't necessarily feel like I could take that and stop it effectively, or even when it slid down into my hand with that much force, would it hurt my hand? In the forward grip, these are very much like parrying daggers combined with a bit of a truncheon effect. Overall, they are, for me, much more effective, not in terms of just reach, but use this way. You can thrust with them, you can parry with them, you can trap with them, you can strike with them. And basically, I learned techniques that are very similar to what they teach in Eskrima, where you get snap, so you can really use sharp, powerful strikes without a lot of recoil, hit some of those areas very accurately, very quickly, at very close range, very quick time. And you don't just hit necessarily with the blade shaft. I actually learned you could hit just like right on the tip. And that could do some really catastrophic damage to targets. You want to split concrete or melons or something like that, that's a great way to do it. And of course the thrusting and the stabbing and the hooking and the pommeling and the other things you could do. But because of that, I did tend to use them more often against an opponent, especially an opponent with a long weapon, like they were parrying daggers. And that also makes sense if I was parrying one of these with a different kind of weapon, like a different kind of sword or something like that. But if I felt like I needed to take a super hard hit, I would turn one of them into a shield and keep the other one in the forward position to take the best benefit of that. So when I picked up butterfly swords, the same thing came with me. Things I could do in the reverse versus the forward position, but and these have a lot more mass in the blade. I feel like I could do a lot stronger parries and blocks with them than I could necessarily with a sai because of that blade mass, especially something like this. Comparisons later, I promise. But if I really feel like I need to be taking a hard hit, I might decide to try to see if I have an advantage turning one of them into a shield. Okay? But I'm not going to flip in the middle of getting hit while I'm inside measure where something can go wrong. I'm going to back up outside of measure, reset my weapon system, guard, whatever, just like you reposition your guard or something like that. That might give me a chance to do it. Now, if I feel like I'm shaky, injured, exhausted, too adrenalized to do it safely, yeah, I'm going to hang on to these things for dear life. I'm not going to flip. And it kind of depends on the situation. But I have definitely found that there's some potential to this combination. There's also obviously a lot of potential to just having them like this. So, all right, a little bit rambly. I hope it was useful, informative, interesting. Let me know in the comments as usual. Let's get our usual conversation started about your training, your experience, your preferences. Also similar weapons that operate like this and how you prefer to use them, or problems that you've had trying to use them in certain ways. But until, well, I finally finish the comparison, thanks as usual for watching, following, liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing. And I do hope to see you back for the verses.